Click. And we're live. It is Sunday, January 17th, 2021, 5:01 p.m., and I have a very amusing story for you all about one Kate Klonick and what a gamer she is. And why we do not have a mystery guest today.
Oh, okay. I'm like, wait, is this all the same story?
Yes, it's all the same story. I'm just embellishing it into a tellable story rather than a sequence of events, KK. All right.
Okay.
So, as you all know, I have been occasionally teasing Janine Balechian, our excellent audience member who is a serious Taylor Swift fan, by suggesting that the mystery guest is going to be Taylor Swift. And once she believed me, and ever since then I have been doing this on a weekly basis, every time trying to escalate a little bit the amount of hype associated with Taylor Swift's presence on the show. So Kate and I have started to use the name Taylor Swift as a surrogate for the word mystery guest. So when we announce that, mystery guest Taylor Swift, that
who's
just
our Taylor Swift for the week. Yeah,
exactly. Right. I today announced, as you all probably saw, that the mystery guest was Taylor Swift, and slapped a picture of Taylor Swift on the front page of In Lieu of Fun. And Kate, being a all-around gamer, decided this was the day to get somebody to dress up as Taylor Swift and show up on the show and pretend to be Taylor Swift and sing Taylor Swift songs and take questions as Taylor Swift. And so
I had done it.
She's done it. Who did you get? I assume we're talking about Maggie Feldman Pilch here.
Yes, and Maggie, who is also always game for anything, was going to be just like in a wig, and she just got her nails done, and she was so game, and was like, we were plotting this yesterday. She was sending me like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to wear this, and I was like, this is great. This is fantastic. And now she accidentally ate some gluten. And
yeah, and Maggie is extremely gluten intolerant and is now
very sick.
Very sick. And so we actually had Taylor Swift booked for the show, and she canceled because she got sick. That is, in some elastic sense of the truth, actually true. So
what is truth then, really, in this era, in this time?
This post-truth era. So we had Taylor Swift booked for y'all. We were going to do it. We will try again next week. But we are mystery guestless this week. This is the first time we have ever had a mystery guest, a total mystery guest fail. But I think it was an admirable effort. And so I think we should bring Janine on to be Taylor Swift.
Oh, could I actually ask Janine a bunch of questions about Taylor Swift? Because I also don't know anything about her and have...
I now know what she looks like because I had to get a picture of her for the show. All right, We're inviting Janine. Janine is going to be our Taylor Swift stand-in, and Kate is going to ask Janine all the Taylor Swift questions. I might just occasionally
forget and call her Taylor because I was so prepped for this interview, and like.
And she, Janine did tell me earlier today that she was wearing a Taylor Swift T-shirt today. So, hello, Janine.
Hi, Janine.
Hi. What? 1 second. Let me fix the camera.
So, is Janine a Taylor Swift super fan?
Apparently. Taylor Swift and rodents, as best as I can tell.
I'm sorry, my camera on my laptop is terrible. But yes, I'm a huge fan of Taylor Swift and rodents. And I'm wearing my 1989 shirt.
Nice. I love it. So, I know that, okay, this is actually going to sound like I should know this. I don't know how old you are, and I will spare you from having to tell us on like some type of live medium. But there is like, I just slightly missed. There was like Taylor Swift came up, if I'm not wrong, as a entered as a country music singer, and she got her start on one of those like reality TV sing along shows. Or not sing along, like you get voted off, like The Voice. Or
no, she was never on, American Idol or anything like that.
Oh, she wasn't.
So,
see, this is like fake news.
You were right that she did come up through country music, but at least as far as I know, she was never on any kind of like auditioning reality song type show.
Oh, I thought that she had like done. Sorry. So this is important. So, anyways, I totally missed her, and then I think that I got to know. I only like really started taking her seriously as like a staying presence when Kanye did that thing.
Yeah,
that he's famous
that was a pivotal moment in her career. She actually, I don't know if she still has it, but she used to have a framed sort of picture of it in her apartment with the caption, "Life is full of interruptions." And now my batteries.
She knows more about Taylor Swift than Taylor does. This is great. I can just actually interview her about Taylor Swift.
Yeah. So here is my question: is the passion for Taylor Swift in people like you roughly the same as the obsessive interest in Bruce Springsteen on the part of people like Preet Bharara and Chris Christie?
Yes, totally. This conversation makes me so happy. Springsteen is actually my third favorite artist.
I love how you have these ranked. Like, how often do they change? Like, what if, like, do you ever wake up and you're like, fuck Bruce, he's going to number 4.
He's now down to 6.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I have sort of like a canonical top 3, and then the rest is all a big mishmash. But yeah, I think that it is very similar to that. I have a close friend who's an enormous Bruce Springsteen fan like that, and sort of like knows everything about Bruce's life and has read all of his biographies. And I think that it's a similar kind of deal with, having obsessively reading whenever Taylor has an interview and knowing all the words to her songs.
So can I also just say, I'm going to pose something. We now know her first and third favorite artists. I say that we make the poll of the day that we try to guess Janine's second favorite artist.
Except that then we would have to have nominations because it has to be multiple choice.
Yes.
So Janine, here's what you're going to do. You're going to send me 6 options, one of which is correct, one of which is ridiculous, and 4 of which are plausible. And okay.
And then we'll see if by the end of this we can guess who your number 2 is. This is going to be fun. But
I'm sure you guys can think of something more interesting to talk about than my musical taste.
Well, seeing as how we're supposed to have Taylor Swift on the show today, I think your musical taste is a pretty good fallback.
Yeah, and I also think that like you seem to know a lot about kind of this. I think that there are, and I'm not just saying this. I think that there's something really real about having. I mean, I have this type of encyclopedic knowledge around moments of content moderation that have happened on the internet and memes. Like, I'm super into that, but like I don't listen to a ton of music, and I've never gotten into kind of pop music, I don't know, kind of sense, like, honestly, like when I was in high school. So
wait, you can't distract Janine now because she's sending me a list of the 6 possibilities.
Oh, I'm supposed to be doing that now. Okay.
Yeah, you have to do that now so that we can submit it, because we're actually, what you don't know, Janine.
Most people are not as like skilled, Ben, as we are, is like talking and simultaneously typing and listening.
So what Janine doesn't know is that we are actually submitting to the audience for decision the question of who her second favorite artist is. And actually, this is a binding poll. So if the audience doesn't validate what you thought was your preference, you actually really do have to change your mind based on the In Lieu of Fun audience's diktat.
Okay, so I'm trying to find out when the Kanye Taylor Swift moment happened. So you sent him 6 names, and I'm going to.
I'm sorry?
That is correct.
I think it was the 2009.
The 2000, for everyone not completely as much in a hole as I am about this type of stuff, I do not know how people have endless bandwidth for stuff like this, and understanding like Russian poison attacks on like members of like the opposition, and also being well versed in like appellate Twitter. I just have like no idea how people do all of these things. So I was just going to say that at the VMAs in 2009, Kanye did not win Album of the Year or Best New Album, Best New Artist.
So no, it was none of the above. It wasn't even a Kanye issue. It was that Taylor beat Beyonce for Best Video. For the You Belong With Me video, which was adorable and wonderful. And then I think Kanye I think he was supposed to be presenting the award, and he, famously was like, Taylor was great.
No, he was not. He was not presenting the award. I remember this part because this is really clear in the GIFs of the meme that generated after this. He jumps onto the stage. He comes out of this. I know that it was about Beyonce, but then he comes off on it. This is like really nice that we can collectively, without Google, be putting together this memory of half incorrectly of like what we believe happened 12 years ago to Kanye and Taylor.
All right, here it is. Okay. With the binding referendum on who is number 2 on Janine's list of favorite artists. I'm sorry, Bruce Springsteen being number 3. I've gotten
this is a really hard decision, knowing that Bruce Springsteen is number 3 and Taylor is number 1.
It should be especially hard knowing that you are actually making up Janine's mind for her, and and she has like no autonomous capacity here.
One of these people is on a poster on my wall, and the rest aren't.
You're gonna have to take it down. You're gonna have to take the poster down if that person does not win the poll.
We'll send
I will also
over.
say that persons 1 and 2 are very close, and then there's like a sort of substantial gap, and then there's Bruce Springsteen.
I see. So Bruce is kind of like in the top 3 doghouse here.
Yeah. It's like it's like a.
I would say it the other way. Sorry. I started listening to Springsteen a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, and that he was sort of like got me through the early pandemic before Taylor put out Folklore, and obviously completely took over my musical listening experience. So he only just moved up from sort of like the general mishmash of artists I like to an actual ranked number 3. So I think he's doing quite well.
All right,
I really like the new album.
Also, there's some good social psychology research on the fact that Olympic bronze medalists are, broadly speaking, much happier than Olympic silver medalists with their performance. This is
it's super true.
It's a really interesting finding because silver medalists are miserable because they didn't win gold, and bronze medalists are thrilled to be on the podium at all.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm happy to be here.
Bruce should be grateful to be in the list at all.
This is perfect because I want to ask. I tweeted the other day that I've made a mistake, and I don't know if everyone is aware, but I just want to preface this briefly with a short story about how my music collection was lost forever. And at some point, Mike Godwin is going to save me from this and help me because he used to work at the Apple store, so I'm sure he can get it back. My partner bought me iTunes Match, which I don't even think exists anymore, but it used to be this service that would replace anything on your hard drive with like a better streaming version of like the song, and it would delete it from your hard drive. And if you unsubscribed from like iTunes Match, like you would just lose it. And so it was basically like them taking all of your old copies of like, here's your old copy of Catcher in the Rye. It's not the greatest. It's like the cover is falling off and maybe like maybe it's not the greatest quality, but we're going to throw it away. And here's a shiny new copy. Oh, but it's a rental. And we're just going to
so coercive.
I know.
All right.
And so, wait, hold on. But
no, go ahead.
Anyways, literally this deleted this giant music library that I had collected illegally for most of my life. But anyways, I never recovered and got very frustrated with like my music on my phone and in my computer, and just kind of stopped listening to music because it was such a source of stress every time I tried to listen to something. So I have not listened to a ton of music, and I've never subscribed to another service again because this burned me so bad. And so I literally don't, I kind of have just been in this kind of desert musically for years. And I bought an LP player and started playing LPs a couple of years ago, and it was surprisingly lovely. Because I owned the music and I could play it whenever I wanted to.
Yes.
Not as portable as a phone, but
all right. So we're gonna let Janine go in a moment because Janine actually has work to do.
I will say, when you said that the guest was Taylor Swift, I obviously did not expect it to be Taylor Swift, but I also didn't expect it to be me without any makeup or preparation.
The things happen in life, Janine.
And you're incredibly charming, Janine.
And by the way, we didn't expect it to be you either.
Okay.
We expected
just feel very lucky.
We expected it to be a Taylor Swift impersonator who got sick and didn't show up. And so we thought we would bring you on. Okay, so now...
I'm really happy to meet you, Janine. Thank you for coming on, and
But before we let you go, we have to reveal the results of the poll.
Oh, yeah.
There is now a second question on the poll, which is your preference among the contestants. So Janine, who did the Adele voters get it right?
That was a red herring. I can see why a lot of people why people would think that someone who likes Taylor Swift and is very into emotional songs with good lyrics about relationships would think that Adele is the number two, but it's not. It is Stevie Nicks all the way.
Wow, so Stevie Nicks, who came in third in the prediction and came in second in the actual preference, although is surging now that your preference is revealed. That's cheating, guys.
Yeah. But by the way, I have three records that there's more, but three records that one is Van Morrison, one is Fleetwood Mac, and then the other is James Taylor. But that's
Taylor Swift is actually named after James Taylor.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
See? What the hell is this? It's like having Wikipedia right here.
All right, Janine, back to work with you.
Bye-bye, guys. Have a good day.
Bye, Janine. That was awesome. I'm so glad we brought her on. She's so cool.
All right. What are we gonna occupy the next 40 minutes with, Kate?
Well, I kind of like the idea of talking about music for the day, and talking about we know you listen to classical music, but I would listen to you talk more about music and more about what you like and how you make decisions and what you listen to in your spare time. And I never have music on in the house. I never have it on in the car. I never have it on my earpods. And I know that there are just people, I know tons of people who exist constantly with music always going, and the exception to things being kind of silence. And I just wonder what that's like. Do you have a streaming service, Ben, that you use? Is this a boring conversation? I don't know. I don't know. Do you know
but I want to grill you about your side of this. Did you grow up in a musical household? Was there music playing when you were a kid?
Oh, it's interesting. My parents have a big disagreement about this. My mom, I can only ever remember my mom listening to classical music on our local NPR station on the drive. And if I wanted to listen to music, she would get annoyed after a few minutes and turn it off in the car. Never want it on. And my dad and found it distracting and annoying. And my dad loved music and would like, like listen to like, but he liked, and Simon and Garfunkel, James Taylor, Van Morrison. And then they both loved, and this is a very weird, my background. They both loved World War II era big band music, like loved it. And so I grew up with like Glenn Miller and then also weirdly like the Andrews sisters. Like, oh my God, we used to listen to that all the time. And like I know like that is like some stuff that if you're not 95 years old, you don't have any
Right.
cultural reference for that. There's like it has not transitioned at all. Um, but like I totally grew up with that. And then my dad used to love old radio shows, like love old like Red Skelets. Like he had this weird obsession with listening to very old time radio shows. And so I would like that would be like what was on in our like. And I know this is like a very weird thing, but like there was no like my don't like I mean, my dad had Beatles albums. Like he had like old records that I looked through, but it was like one or two boxes of old records, and then that was it. It wasn't like it was on
That's
all the time where
interesting.
they, yeah. So it's just like a totally different thing, and I think because that there's not like a foundation there. It's like when things have gotten too much and out of control, like music falls out of my life very quickly as like a thing because it feels like effort, like to keep up on it. It's not something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much. So I actually think that is the single biggest determinant of how much music people listen to is just how much music was playing in the house they grew up in
Yes.
and in what form. And so I grew up in a house where my father was a quite accomplished pianist, and played regularly. But for my educational purposes, I think more importantly than that, he was a quite fanatical record collector, starting
Oh,
in
really?
LP days. He had been a radio DJ for when he was in college in the music, in the sort of classical music radio show. But he had also, just in his college radio station. But his father, my grandfather, uh, uh, was very serious about music, and so my dad grew up playing piano and listening to a lot of music, and had very, I mean, he knew the discography of classical music recording extremely well, and I just kind of grew up with that in the house. So I was very, it was like in the 80s, but very much of a 60s kid in this regard. That, my father was also fairly serious about jazz, certain types of jazz, but like it was very much of a classical music household. And my sister was a very, very accomplished pianist, actually much better than my father. And So I kind of grew up sort of surrounded by that, and in a very kind of 1960s sort of way, my rebellion was to get interested in, you know, in various rock and roll and whatever, that was not what I was, you know.
But from the 60s or from the 80s?
No,
Like
no,
what
no. I
was
just
like,
mean it's a very 60s style of rebellion, right? Like
oh,
I
oh,
don't,
right. Okay.
I dabbled in all sorts of stuff. But then what happened to me, and this was, you know, what really pulled me back. And I never, jokes aside, been, I've never disliked contemporary music at all. But what really pulled me back into traditional music was playing the French horn. And I had dabbled on a lot of different instruments beforehand. Particularly, I played violin when I was a small child, and had later played trumpet. And I was never very good at it. And when I picked up the French horn for the first time, I was sort of midway through high school, and I could just play it. And I could play it actually reasonably well.
Kind of
And
amazing. I've
um,
like, is that happen with people and like a particular instrument? I've heard of like a kind
so
of
I
yes
was I
that
was
happens with a
I,
guitar or piano, but that seems because like they're like a French horn isn't.
so I was a relatively experienced brass player because I'd played French horn, I'd played trumpet, which is, and I had also played, I played for various band purposes. I'd played euphonium, which is kind of a low brass, sort of a
I know, yeah.
mid range tuba, and so I had, I had there's a lot of playing brass that is, you know, reasonably common between instruments. Um, how your mouth is built matters for this. And
Hmm.
the French horn mouthpiece is an unusually shaped little device. It merged well with my lips.
Is that true? I
And
didn't know that the mouthpieces for brass instruments were all very different.
they're radically different. So
Interesting. I did not know that.
a uh, like they're quite different from one another. Um, and the French horn is, supposed to be the hardest of the brass instruments. And as a
I
result,
have heard that.
very few people play it. It naturally fit my face in a way that, and the thing is, if you're a teenager who can play the French horn really well or even moderately well, all these opportunities open up for you because
It's so difficult.
and there are all these gorgeous parts in all these orchestral pieces, and there aren't enough people who can play them competently. And so I would just go from youth orchestra, sort of saying, "Hey, do you need a French horn player?" And they always did, and they would, and so my last 2 years of high school, I had this great time, and I learned a fair bit of repertoire. And there's nothing kind of like, and then I hurt my jaw and never played again. But that was okay because that kind of experience of like playing intensively for a while and having this really thinking about the way orchestras are put together, it causes you to listen to music very differently. And that has stuck with me for the rest of my life. And so that was kind of what pulled me back into the classical repertoire that I kind of had a kind of ambient familiarity with because I grew up in a house with a lot of it. And I guess the big thing that I learned from my father about music, other than a huge amount about music, was that it is okay to just be a serious listener of it. And so people are asking in the chat about Oberlin, and yes, I went to Oberlin because I was a French horn player. That was kind of the reason I went. I wanted to be in and around the conservatory, and I was thinking when I went that maybe I would take a double degree and do a degree in the conservatory. Uh, when I injured my jaw, which I still have a scar on it from, which is you probably can't see on the camera, but there's a scar that runs down my face like that.
Oh no. I've never noticed
And
that scar in
yeah,
person.
it's almost invisible now, but you can. I guess you can't in the light, but I had to have it fixed surgically the summer before I went to college, and I was never able to kind of rehab in a way that would make me a remotely competitive player in the context of the Oberlin Conservatory, where without my injury, I would have been one of the worst players in. I mean, there were people there who were, destined for serious professional careers, and I was not of that caliber. But
That's such a, I'm so glad that you finally told the story. I did not know any of that. That's wonderful.
I
Like that, I mean, that's an incredible
probably
experience. I'm a little sad that you're not, that like it's the type of thing that you can't like pick up and do recreationally and like have it part of your life anymore.
I
Like,
could, but I just never have. Um, it's a, um, it's a, um, and when I am serious about music, I'm serious, which is intermittent, honestly. I'm serious about listening to it, not about playing it. And that is you know, learning how to listen to music is something that a lot of people never bother to learn, just
Oh
as
my
like
God. Sorry, I'm just like completely agreeing with you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. That
and
was
that
just
is
me like kind of
and
exclaiming.
it's a skill. I mean, and it's something that requires a certain kind of attention span that we don't really train to in other contexts very much. And we have this idea of music as background stuff, which is an interesting idea. It's not something that, most music or most great music anyway wasn't written to be played in the background. And so I do think that there's a lot of people who believe that a lot of things are inaccessible that aren't. They just don't quite know how. They just haven't actually been trained in what they're listening for. Um,
So I, how do you get better at that? So I want to tell a story, but like, if you have like, is that, I mean, it feels like a longer answer to that question.
well, so there are a few answers to that question, and it kind of depends at what level you're asking the question. So let me answer it at three different levels. There is one level at which the essence of listening to music is stillness. And this is music that was meant to be performed in concert halls or in chamber settings. And so you have to recreate something like that setting. That is, you're not going to do something else while you listen to it. You're going to try to replicate for yourself the experience of being able to watch different players do different things. So if you're listening to an orchestra, to actually think about which instruments is playing and what different voices you're hearing. Or if you're thinking about, my first love is chamber music. If you're thinking about chamber music, like really thinking about what voices are there and what's going on with them. So that's just at one level, like how closely you pay attention to it. The second level is, I think it is impossible to really listen to some music anyway without knowing a little bit of music history. And so shout out here to the at least one music historian we have on the in the audience today, Richard. But when you're listening to music that was written in a certain period, the relationship between that music and the music that was written 50 years earlier or 50 years later or 10 years earlier is actually important. And in exactly the same way that we think of effortlessly with respect to contemporary music, oh, Taylor Swift is playing here with, I don't know anything about Taylor Swift, but Taylor Swift is playing here with something that so and so did in this song, right? And, so the famous crossover example of this is the Paul Simon song, uh, Yes, I've often felt forsaken and many times abused, and I'm certain, that. So that is
Yep.
a theme from Bach that shows up repeatedly in the St. Matthew's Passion and in various iterations, and in the Christmas Oratorio. And
But
so, like, but if you start with pre-Baroque music, about which I know relatively little, and then you go into the Baroque period, the composers who are working from roughly 1600 through the mid 20th century are super aware of the history that they're writing in. and they are, and it is, I think it is impossible to access a lot of 20th century music, which sounds pretty inaccessible, without understanding late 19th century music, for example. Um, and and so the second answer to your question is, like, actually, it's not that big a project to sort of start with. You know, if you start with Monteverdi, Gesualdo, Josquin, and you work your way 3.5 centuries, it'd take you a couple years to learn a bit of music history in any kind. But it's actually not more time than people spend, say, learning all the lyrics of all the songs of Taylor Swift, right?
No.
Or like it's the same level of interest that causes people to talk about Bruce Springsteen the way Preet Bharara does, you know, causes people to actually spend a little bit of time with the history of Western music, not all of which is that Western, by the way. And so
No,
that's
it's like,
answer number 2. Answer number 3 is the real answer, which is somewhere in the cacophony of that history, there is the piece of music that grabs you by the throat and picks you up and down and goes like this with you. And for me, when I was 15, it was Porgy and Bess.
oh, I love that.
So-
I love Porgy and Bess.
So
Oh my
Porgy and-
God. For me, it was
Porgy
like
and Bess
Showboat.
was the first opera that ever just grabbed me, and partly because I like, you know, Gershwin is very likable and does all kinds of interesting things, partly because it's in English, so it's accessible. But once you have the experience of falling in love with a piece of music in a deep way and watching it over and over and over again, listening to it over and over again, listening to 20 different performances of it, then what happens is you say, okay, well, who was Gershwin like, what are the influences on this? Where does this come from? And the answer to that question turns out to be super, super interesting. He is, at the time he writes this, he is studying with Ravel, who is, you know, a completely different tradition. If you look at it is only 40, 50 years between the last Verdi operas and Porgy and Bess. This Verdi is a big influence on Porgy and Bess. And so you start tracking backwards and you start building out knowledge and around the thing that you fall in love with. So I guess that's the answer, like, or at least the 3 components of the answer. Like, one is just,
I feel like
one is
number 3
just
was worth waiting for. Like,
slow down and actually, like, listen to something the way you read.
Or like the way that it was, you think that it might be intended to be listened to.
Yeah. Like, if the experience of, like, to take a total...
Because that's not true of, like, you're speaking to traditional music people, but, like, you could, like, that's like a slightly different thing than, like, contemporary music people. Like, it's fine. If you want to appreciate contemporary music, to walk around and do other things, maybe, while you have, like, Simon and Garfunkel on in the background and still appreciate it. It's not, you know, versus, like, the chamber music you're talking about, where, like, they did mean for it to be played in concert halls, and you should sit in your seat and maybe listen to it and think about it and take it as a moment.
Just take a total Warhorse for a moment. So many Warhorse pieces that everybody knows, not the greatest pieces in the world. Some are. So one of them that is Beethoven's Fifth, which is actually one of the greatest pieces of orchestral music anybody ever bothered to write. Now, Beethoven's Fifth, is recognizable, but particularly the first movement is recognizable to most people who are even marginally educated.
But just the dun 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 dun.
Yeah, exactly. But if you hear da 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 dun da da da, you'll say, oh, that's Beethoven's Fifth, right? But Beethoven's Fifth, it's probably about a 38, 39-minute piece at most tempos.
Yes, it's much longer.
So it's like reading a novel, right? You wouldn't read a novel in the background. And so then you say, have you ever really listened to Beethoven's Fifth? Like, listen to it from the beginning to the end, all four movements, without doing something else at the same time. And that is that's a completely different experience from an ambient awareness of that triplet, and then the half note. So you can, so those are different experiences. And it's a choice that people make not to do the latter, to do the former. It's a fine choice. I'm not criticizing it, but it is roughly the equivalent to going jogging through the Louvre. Oh, there's Liberty leading the people. Well, got the Mona Lisa over there.
Can we just have like one brief moment? Because like what you're saying actually strikes me as like you mentioned the Louvre and then you mentioned a novel. And I want to actually talk about how music is different. Like a pure audio experience is different. And like from a sensory level and like an attention level than all of the things that you talked about. Like it takes like reading a novel is different from observing a painting, and you jog through the Louvre, but like the Louvre is like a curated experience, and people spend all of this time painting paintings, and then is a painting meant to like a lot of paintings that are now in the Louvre are meant to be like masturbatory paintings of like patrons. They just wanted like kind of like created to like create their legacy, or they don't deserve maybe like they're beautiful like artwork and they're historically interesting, but the art of them is not actually that kind of lasting and incredible. Does that make sense? And so like I'm kind of actually like I think that like you make that comparison, but I get what you're saying, but I do think that there is like I've been thinking this a lot as you were talking, and I was like, but that relationship with music is so different from how I feel about like visual art, like, and how, which I have like a much, like that is like my kind of like, I've always like I love museums. Though that was like, when you talked about like what my experience with music was, my mom would traipse me around to like every major, like every time we were in like Boston or New York or wherever, I was going to a gallery and going to an exhibition and going to all of these things and like experiencing kind of visual art. And it was totally different. And also like the way that you engage with it is zoom in, zoom out. It's like all the same. It's like different. If you've done it, you realize how much work it is and how difficult it is. I don't know. There's just like, I will say that the one thing that hits me as you're kind of saying this is, so I grew up with, and this was kind of a weird story, but one of my best friends growing up had an older brother who was like 2 or 3 years older than her, who was a complete musical genius, and he is now a conductor at a major metropolitan city for their orchestra. He went to Juilliard, got snatched up out of Juilliard by the Chicago. He actually played. Actually, it would interest you, Ben. He was like always a genius on trumpet and trombone. So brass was his thing. He went to Juilliard on a trombone scholarship, and went to Juilliard, and then was picked out by the Chicago Opera to become first chair trombonist at 19, and did that, and then like has now like moved into the conducting sphere and is like doing conducting work, and was like has gone all over the place. And like everything, if you like what growing up with him, like in the background of growing up with like my friend, was like everything for him. Like music meant everything to him. It was like it was this different language and a different world that he was like could see that like everyone else couldn't see. It's like
Well,
really literally what it felt like. I
yeah,
was like, yeah, like it was just like
so
like it was just it felt totally
like
different.
people find that very intimidating, and you know, I definitely grew up with some people who were, you know, quite prodigious and became famous, important musicians. Um, and like we all knew that they were gonna do stuff, and like we weren't. And you know, um, but they will hear things that you don't hear, and it doesn't matter how long I train. There is just like I can see in 3 dimensions and you can see in 3 dimensions and you can draw it and I can't. That means you're seeing something that I'm not seeing.
Yeah, maybe that's true. That's a great point.
And I'm comfortable with that. It doesn't mean I can't appreciate the drawing less, but I am aware that there's things I can't see. That somebody who has an understanding of how to translate an image into a 2-dimensional image can see and can see intuitively. And some of that can be taught and some of it can't be taught. The stuff that I'm talking about is a level well below that. I can train anybody. Most people cannot tell you the difference. You know, if they listen to a piece of music, they can't tell you what century it was written in. Some, like the 20th century, sometimes is sufficiently distinctive that people can tell you, but I can teach anybody to identify 17th century music from 18th century music, from 19th century music, from 20th century music. Anybody. That is a skill that you don't have to have like a deep musical language. Richard will back me up on this in the chat, I hope. That is a skill that anybody can learn. It's just a question of whether they want to learn it. And by the way, you can do that.
You could also be better. And you could also be better. Like, I took a lot of drawing lessons. Like, I took a lot of art classes. And like, what people don't talk about is like having a tiny bit of talent or kind of like thing means that people push you more towards that type of thing and more towards training. And that like, I don't know, like so it becomes kind of a chicken and egg problem.
Yes, of course. But there are other vectors in the classical music world. I think it is pretty easy to teach people the sonic differences between what 19th century Italian music sounds like and 19th century German music sounds like. That's a more complicated one because those were written in great dialogue with one.
Sorry,
yeah, well, the other has a German accent. But the Russian music sounds different from German music, sounds different from Italian music. Are there things that are going to trip you up in that one? Sure. But there are.
Did you grow up looking at visual art though, Ben? Like, was that like a part of your life?
Yes, but not in the same way.
Yeah.
I was but also I just grew up with a knowledge that I couldn't do that stuff. And that was by the way, that was not true of my sister. That was not true of, but I always understood it to be true of me. And when as a child would listen to music, I could imagine myself in the orchestra. And when I look at a painting, I could imagine myself having nothing to do with it other than as a...
But,
and that matters.
That really totally matters. I mean, that's kind of how I feel about chamber music. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on here, but I can appreciate the beauty and work that has gone into this.
So the best introduction to chamber music in the world is actually not chamber music. It is,
You're going to tell me to listen to Kanye West. If you say
nope,
this, I'm going to be very angry.
nope. It is 6 pieces, all by Bach. And they are a lot of people know them because some of the themes in them are very famous, but they are the suites for unaccompanied cello.
Oh,
And
I've heard these before.
there are
Yeah.
many great performances of them. But but getting getting falling in love with the sound of strings by themselves. There is no better piece of music to do that with than a solo cello, and these are just fabulous suites. They were actually written, so the definition of a suite in the Baroque era was they were dance music, right? So this was a string of 6 pieces that you could do formal dancing to. I think these were probably never meant to be danced to, but maybe they were. And I think people fall in love with the Bach cello suites, and then they're more receptive to the idea of a piece for, just, a violin and cello, or, a string quartet, right? The idea of very super small forces. And so I always, when people are interested in sort of in chamber music, I always like to start with, partly because Bach is so spare and simple and endlessly complicated, which is an unusual combination.
Yeah, that's a kind of a beautiful recommendation. This is really fun. I'm really glad we finally got to have this conversation. I got to kind of hear about how you came into the French horn. So the thing about like wind versus brass versus string instruments is like, I do feel like is the reason that there has been so much string instrument work, or so much kind of emphasis in string instruments, because of its availability. Do you I don't know. Well, I think that's a really complicated question.
So I think the reason that stringed instruments have something that is not available to certainly not brass, but to a lesser extent is true of woodwinds, but not quite in the same way, which is the ability to play continuously. So, if you have an orchestra, this is not a problem because because you have many instruments that can carry a line, right? But if you're in very small forces, there is a limit to how long you can blow into a trumpet without actually physically taking it off your mouth. And so if you listen to orchestra, like big forces music, the winds are not playing all the time, right? So if you're talking about very small forces music, the most adaptable instruments are the ones that can play on a continuous basis. So the piano, super, super useful in small forces music because you can just play it continuously. The violin, you can actually, like all the strings, you can never take your bow off the string, right? You don't have to take a breath, right? The more work the production of an individual note is, the oboe and the bassoon can carry lines for very long periods of time. Hence, the
it's a
woodwind
very
quintet.
small. It's it's woodwind, but it's so small, and so you're just there's so little air, and so you can just do it for a very long time, right?
Right.
That would be what I imagine.
And it's why, if you look at bands, the woodwind section is actually the workhorse of a band. It's not the loudest. It's not the part that people think of, but they're actually, your clarinets and your flutes and your saxophones do a lot of the work of. So that's the I think that's the reason why so much chamber music is driven by strings. Is just it's actually very hard to write. And if you think about the woodwind quintet, it's exquisitely put together to avoid the problem that not having strings. It's heavy with instruments that can carry long lines. So the oboe,
Yeah.
the bassoon, and the flute.
It's such an interesting, like, I don't know. So, anyways, this is all to say that I feel like when I was growing up, my mom would be like, yes, go and do chorus, go and do like these like jazz, like go do jazz band, even though I like didn't make the auditions and like whatever. I will say that like even at a basic level, having to have been in an orchestra, like when I was an idiot and didn't know what the hell I was doing, like and I was playing like Ode to Joy over and over again for like an audience of 80 that were all parents, was like kind of one of these things where I kind of think that that there is that I just kind of think that there is it does force you to actually reckon with the politics of an orchestra, or the at least a little bit, like you do have to become aware of how an orchestra is put together. And I know that sounds silly, but it does help you in your musical appreciation. Like if you understand that there is like a first chair and a principal, and that those are like that those mean different things, and there are leadership roles, and that they
that
have
everybody
like,
tunes to the oboe because the oboe is the instrument that you have the least control over its pitch. I mean, there's a reason why an orchestra is organized the way it is.
No, but like being part of an orchestra is like, I think my mom always thought of it as like, well, that'll just be a good experience. But it really was like, she wasn't wrong. Like, it was like, it really truly taught me a lot of stuff, not just like about orchestras, but like in life, like that there's like forgotten instruments, that there are things that like the text doesn't make room for. So nice to see you. You are
Richard,
Hello.
happy face.
Richard, I've brought you on
Swift.
to ask whatever question you want, but also to correct me on any matters that I may have gotten wrong.
You pretty much nailed it. I'm very impressed. So if the
Not surprised.
If the lawfare thing doesn't work for you, you could you become a music historian. So no, yeah, you really nailed it. So.
Richard, how did you get into music? Not music, but into what you do for a living?
Well, I grew up doing music. Both of my parents were music professors, and I took to it very early. And my father started giving me records when I was 6. First record he gave me was the Beethoven Fifth, and I just listened to it over and over and over and drove everyone wild. And then when I was around 12 or 13, I discovered, and this sort of relates to Ben's Gershwin experience, I discovered the Berg Violin Concerto. And I was so fascinated with the piece that it just drove me to find what led up to it and then what came afterwards. And so that's where I really developed a sense of music history, just by looking at how those things developed. And then actually I was planning to go to conservatory as a violist. And then I got sidetracked by a religious cult. I think I told that story. And then ended up studying math and engineering and worked in that. And I was just unhappy being out of music. So in my late 20s, I went back to school for music history. And that's how I'm where I am today.
Richard, what a cool
super story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing it.
Sure.
And we're like, no, it's so great to have you on all the time. If only because like I feel like Ben bonds with you, and then I'm like, yes, more music stories. This is so great. Like, I mean, like, I don't want to sound. It's not meant to sound at all. Like, I just feel I don't have an appreciation for it, and I want to both learn an appreciation for it, and I feel it can be learned, and I hope it can be learned. but there's also just kind of like a wonder at like, I'm kind of curious like about like, it feels like there's an entire world in which people like kind of access this enjoyment from like this thing that like to me seems like mostly something that like I ignore for most of my daily life. And I I I kind of like I'm like, well, that seems fascinating to me, and like
Mhm.
why people like are like intuitively drawn to these various types of things.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
I mean, like Ben was saying, I think a lot of it is what you grow up with in your household early on. But I find teaching it, especially when I'm teaching non-music majors, that the big differentiator is between those who actually want to learn about it and those who don't. And
Right.
those who want to learn about it, they really take to it, and they'll keep, they'll finish the class and then keep going back to concerts and so on.
when I was in
Yeah.
AP biology, my one of my teacher at the time in high school said, I would rather have a student that does all the work and is like not the brightest student or not the smartest student, but does all the work every time than
Mhm.
like the bright student, the smart student that doesn't do any of it,
Yep.
but gets the answer right. Like, then they'd both have the same grade. But like, I would take the former over the latter any day. And like, I think that that's, as a teacher, I completely agree with that. Like, it's just kind of, it's so much better.
Yeah, when those students who are curious, those are the ones that you really hit it off with, and that's always a wonderful thing.
All right, your question, and I think
So,
you're going to be the only one today.
okay, well, my question is the desert island question. So you're exiled to a desert island, and you can only bring one piece in several different genres. Let's say opera, symphony, concerto, string chamber music, piano piece, oratorio. I'll put an oratorio.
You'll put in an oratorio for me?
Yes, got to put an oratorio. So,
Wait,
Um,
hold on. Stop being dorks. Like, what is going on? Can I say like Taylor Swift here? Like, wait, what can I, is that can that be, or is this just for Ben?
uh,
you could say songs like.
all right, let
Okay.
me. All right, so
Ben, what would you take with you?
all right, give me. You got to go through the categories with me.
Okay, let's try opera.
All right, so opera, I can identify it down to two. I cannot choose between Otello and Don Giovanni, and
That's
I refuse to choose.
that is
Not
that
Porgy and
is
Bess?
that's an impossible choice.
It's an
Actually.
impossible
It
choice.
really is.
And Porgy and Bess, youthful me would have certainly taken Porgy and Bess, but
But you've outgrown it. Okay, fair.
I've in no sense outgrown it. I have, I am,
If you
I
had
am.
to be doomed to listen to it forever, you would rather listen to these more sophisticated things, or like not more sophisticated, but like a different level of like complication.
Someday I am going to tell you the story of Don Giovanni, Kate, and about how it was created by a con man who a defrocked priest who is buried near your school in Queens and was the first professor of Italian at Columbia University, having shown up in Vienna, declaring himself the greatest librettist in the world, having never written a libretto in his life, and had everybody eating out of his hands, including Mozart.
Is this true? Is this
And
like
yeah,
It's a totally true story.
and yeah, the three greatest Mozart operas.
that sounds like the talented Mr. Ripley shit.
It is a totally talented Mr. And then when
Yeah.
Mozart died, he got on a boat and went to New York. And
That is like almost the exact same. Oh, it is the
like
same
it's
story.
it's a really weird
Oh
story.
my god, that's crazy.
Lorenzo da Ponte, it's a fabulous story, and so don't dive down the this is all so sophisticated. This is like a con man and a down and out musician got together and wrote the greatest opera ever.
And they're doing it for the money too.
And totally for the money.
Yeah.
And by the way, nobody who's ever seen Don Giovanni has walked away saying, "Oh, that's so sophisticated. I'm not sure I understood it." It is a total frickin' page turner.
Yeah, and
That's
it's
great.
it's very earthy a lot of the time, most of the time actually. So,
all right, next category.
Okay, let's say orchestral work. I said symphony before, but orchestral work.
Either way. Well, so if you say, and I only get one.
These things.
Well, you're
What's
running
a
the
symphony?
show. You can.
I
Have
guess. Look, the Bartók Concerto for Orchestra is something I would have a very hard time never listening to again. But if you tell me I'm not allowed to listen to the Ninth Symphony again, that would be upsetting too. So I do have a Concerto for Orchestra fetish.
do you have a favorite recording of the Concerto for Orchestra?
Yeah, the Boulez Chicago Symphony.
That's a wonderful recording.
What is yours?
Probably one of the Boulez recordings, either the New York Philharmonic one or the Chicago Symphony one. Although Reiner is awfully good.
Yes.
So, yeah, that piece has gotten a lot of great performances. So
yes, it's a wonderful piece, and to anybody who doesn't think they like, non-melodic or semi-melodic mid-century 20th century music, listen to it 3 times and you'll change your mind.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right,
Sure.
Chamber music. If I could only have one piece of chamber music, it would be the Brahms Opus 25 piano quartet.
Now. Do you know the Schoenberg orchestration of that?
I do not.
Oh, it's a riot. It is a riot. And
I've never heard it orchestrated. I have this wonderful, but I have this wonderful old Rubinstein. I think it's with the Guarneri.
Probably, yeah.
It's a wonderful performance. But that piece just, I wake up in the morning thinking about it sometimes.
Steve just put my choice in the chat. The Beethoven Opus 132.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of the Beethoven string quartets that you kind of can't live without.
Yeah. Yeah, you should look up that Schoenberg arrangement. It's a riot, and
I don't even think I knew it existed, actually.
Yeah, it's great. That and some of his Bach orchestrations too are just they're just a lot of fun.
As to my favorite oratorio, the one oratorio I could not live without, I guess I'm going to betray Handel here and say that that it would have to be the St. Matthew's Passion.
Yeah, that's one of those go-to pieces. It's just so
I'm
great.
Scandalized, Ben. No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Someone's asking what an oratorio is. An oratorio is, but the best way to explain it is in terms of its origin. It's like an opera without any acting. It's just all entirely sung on stage. And in fact, that's how oratorio. That's one theory of how oratorio originated. The theaters closed down during Lent, and so you had opera without acting.
And also, theater theater was banned under Cromwell in England, and so the at least in English music, Handel stops writing Italian opera. The Italians won't have anything to do with him. Cromwell won't let them perform, so they all go home, and he writes in English. So the Handel operas are in Italian, the oratorios are in English, and he writes them all on religious themes so that Cromwell can't object.
Well, and of course that's actually typical of oratorio. Did tend to be actually until later in Handel's career, did tend to be on religious themes.
Right.
And not even classical mythology, but religious themes. But the reason for the operas in Italian is that was actually an international convention. And if you look at the German theaters of the time, and the operas there that people are writing are generally in Italian. There are a few German operas, but that's the convention. Outside of in France, they will actually have French operas that is sung in the vernacular, that written in French, but that was actually the overwhelming convention. People wouldn't think of, in a lot of places they wouldn't think about writing an opera in English, for example.
Well, even by the time Mozart is writing, which is,
That's right.
75, 100 years later,
That's right.
the high form, he gets somebody to write an Italian libretto for him.
That's right. Yeah, that's why, that's why the German operas are the ones that were written for the more popular theater, in more popular theaters in Vienna, and they're great too.
Yes.
Richard,
all right. Thank you, Richard.
Sorry,
you're welcome.
I don't want to cut you. This is kind of, with all due respect to both of you, this was adorable and kind of amazing to watch both of you geek out with each other for a couple of minutes. I thoroughly enjoyed watching it, and I'm sure that at some later point, something that you said will sink into my brain, and I will be a better person for it. But thank you so much, Richard, for coming on so often.
I will create a YouTube. How's this? Today. I will create a YouTube playlist in a tweet thread of all of the several pieces of music we just discussed.
That'd be great.
Yeah. That would be amazing.
I'm not sure all of them will be available in the recordings in which we discuss, but I will make them all available.
Yeah, that would be great.
And I will tweet them, and in the In Lieu of Fun Twitter thread, we'll retweet them.
Great. Richard,
all right.
So great to see you. Thanks for coming.
So I want to thank Taylor Swift for coming on the show today. Thanks to Janine.
I'm actually really thankful to Janine, and I loved this conversation today.
Yeah, it was good fun.
I learned a ton, and it just was really fun. It was really, really fun. So
we're gonna bring Taylor Swift back next week for Mystery Guest Sunday.
Yep.
Tomorrow we have
you have to talk to her. People.
I have to find a Taylor Swift. Yeah. Okay. Tomorrow we have Clint Watts.
Oh, we do. We booked Clint for it. Oh, perfect. Wonderful. I'm excited. We have a Jillian York on Tuesday. I don't know who is going to be on Inauguration Day, and we have Jeff. We have a big week.
Yeah, we have a big week coming up.
Yeah.
All right.
It'll be great.
And all of that will be 22 hours and 46 minutes from now. And until then, Kate?
We don't have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, we do have so many YouTube playlists.
We do. And we're about to have one more, the Wattenbarger Wittes Geek Out playlist.
I really I'm not, it was very enjoyable to watch that and to listen to it. You guys were it was great. So I'm glad we had this snafu. It worked out for the best.